Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the frozen mysteries of Winterhold, where magic and ruin intertwine beneath endless snow. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what games you want me to cover next. Now, before we get started, here's a fact you probably won't believe. You're not subscribed yet. That's right. After all the hours you've spent exploring frozen ruins and uncovering ancient mysteries, the strangest secret of all is why that subscribe button remains untouched like a forgotten tomb. So go ahead, unlock it like a master level lock. Because unlike the College of Winterhold's entrance exam, this one doesn't require you to cast a single spell. The ancient capital's whispered beginnings, long before Solitude claimed the title of Skyrim's capital, Winterhold stood as the beating heart of Nordic power, its spires reaching toward frozen skies like fingers grasping at divinity itself. The city's origins blur into legend, tangled with myths of the legendary archmage Shalidor, whose exploits have been embroidered by countless storytellers until truth and fiction dance together like snowflakes in northern winds. Some accounts claim Shalidor built the entire city, with nothing more than a whispered spell, his voice carrying such power that stone obeyed his breath, and towers rose from permafrost as easily as flowers bloom in spring. Whether this represents literal truth or merely poetic hyperbole, celebrating his immense magical prowess, remains one of Winterhold's enduring mysteries, a question scholars debate in hushed tones while snow gathers on ancient windowsills. The city predates most written records, its establishment likely occurring during the early First Era, when the Nords were still consolidating their power across Skyrim, building a civilization from the harsh wilderness that tested every generation's resolve. Winterhold's golden age of prosperity. During its height, Winterhold rivaled even Solitude in wealth, influence, and cultural significance, serving not merely as a political center, but as a beacon of Nordic achievement that drew ambitious souls from across Tamriel. The city sprawled across the broken cape, its districts extending far beyond the handful of buildings that remain today, connected by bustling streets where merchants hawked exotic wares and scholars debated philosophy beneath the perpetual twilight of northern summers. Great halls housed jarls whose decisions shaped the fate of kingdoms, while craftsmen worked in workshops that never grew quiet, producing goods so fine that traders journeyed through blizzards to acquire them. The College of Winterhold stood even then, though its relationship with the city fluctuated across centuries as Nordic attitudes toward magic shifted like wind patterns over the Sea of Ghosts. During periods of prosperity, the college and city existed in symbiotic harmony, with mages contributing their knowledge to civic projects while benefiting from the protection and resources a great city provided, creating a golden age when magic and mundane life wove together in beautiful complexity. Shalidor's legendary origins and powers. Shalidor remains one of history's most enigmatic figures, a wizard whose accomplishments have been chronicled, exaggerated, and sometimes invented entirely, making it nearly impossible to separate the man from the myth that surrounds him like morning mist. Historical accounts credit him with feats that border on the impossible, suggesting his understanding of magic reached levels few mortals have ever approached. His grasp of arcane principles so profound that reality itself seemed to bend more readily to his will than to the wills of lesser mages. Tales describe him battling entire Dwemer legions single-handedly, his spells holding back mechanical armies that would have crushed ordinary forces beneath their relentless advance. though whether these battles actually occurred or represent allegorical stories about conflicts between magical philosophy and technological advancement remains unclear. He allegedly stole the secret of life from Akatosh himself, though what this secret entailed and how one might steal knowledge from a divine being invites more questions than it answers, suggesting perhaps a breakthrough in understanding mortality and time rather than literal theft from a god. Shalidor's transformation of Bromjunar. Centuries after Bromjunar's fall, Shalidor discovered the ruins and recognized their potential as something beyond mere archaeological curiosity, seeing in those ancient stones an opportunity to create a testing ground that would separate truly capable mages from those who merely possessed raw power without the wisdom or skill to wield it responsibly. He constructed his labyrinth deep within the ruins, engineering a gauntlet of magical challenges designed to push archmage candidates to their absolute limits, testing not only their knowledge of spells but their ability to apply that knowledge under pressure, to think creatively when conventional solutions failed, and to demonstrate the combination of academic excellence and practical competence that Shalidor valued above all other qualities. This initiative aligned with his broader movement to restrict magic to those who proved themselves worthy, discouraging spell use among common people who lacked proper training, a philosophy that contributed to the organization of magical education into structured schools and the eventual founding of institutions like the College of Winterhold. The labyrinth itself consists of two interconnecting mazes arranged in an hourglass pattern, their paths winding through chambers where ancient magic still linger, waiting to challenge or destroy those who attempt to navigate their dangers without adequate preparation. The College of Winterhold's disputed founding. The college's exact founding date remains subject to scholarly debate, with different sources offering conflicting accounts that span centuries, making it frustratingly difficult to establish a definitive timeline for one of Skyrim's most important magical institutions. Papers kept in the college's library reportedly date back to the late Second Era, suggesting the institution existed at least that far back, with documents from 2E373 indicating some form of academic collaboration between the college and the Roman Empire, implying the college had already achieved sufficient prominence to warrant imperial attention and cooperation. Serana, when freed from her imprisonment, recalls the college existing during her time, which places it somewhere between the Roman dynasty and the rise of the Septim Empire, further confirming its Second Era origins while leaving the precise founding year shrouded in uncertainty. However, Mirabelle Irvine, the college's master wizard before her tragic death, states during tours of the facility that it has been a fixture of Skyrim for thousands of years, its inception credited to Archmage Shalidor in the First Era, which would make it far older than most other evidence suggests. This discrepancy might reflect the difference between myth and documented history, with Shalidor's legendary connection to the college representing spiritual founding rather than literal construction, or perhaps the college exists on a site where Shalidor conducted earlier work, his ancient teachings forming the philosophical foundation, even if the current physical structure arose later. The college's architectural marvel. The College of Winterhold represents an architectural achievement that continues to inspire awe in those who understand the magical engineering required to maintain such a structure under impossible conditions. It stands on a pillar of rock and ice that juts from the Sea of Ghosts, connected to the mainland by a single bridge that has survived centuries of storms, earthquakes, and the cataclysmic Great Collapse that destroyed the surrounding city. The college's courtyard centers around a pool from which pure magical energy streams upward in a visible pillar, its glow illuminating the snow-covered grounds even during the darkest winter nights, serving both as a focus for arcane study and a testament to the college's command over raw magicka. A statue of young Shalidor dominates the courtyard, depicting the legendary mage in his prime, forever frozen in stone as a reminder of the standards he set and the heights to which ambitious students might aspire if they dedicate themselves sufficiently to their studies. The main hall, called the Hall of the Elements, serves as the central gathering space where students practice spells under instructor supervision, its high ceiling designed to contain wayward fireballs and ward against the occasional summoning accident that inevitably occurs when novices experiment beyond their current capabilities. The Arcanium's vast knowledge. Above the Hall of the Elements sits the Arcanium, a library that houses one of the most impressive collections of magical texts in all of Tamriel, its shelves groaning under the weight of books dating back to the Merethic era, containing knowledge that most of the world has forgotten or never knew existed. Urag Gro-Shub, an Ortsimer librarian, guards this collection with protective fervor that borders on obsessive, his dedication to preserving and organizing these texts absolute, treating each book as a precious treasure that must be protected from damage, theft, or the careless hands of students who fail to appreciate the irreplaceable value of the knowledge they casually peruse. The library contains not only spell tomes and magical treatises, but also historical documents, philosophical works, and personal journals left by previous archmages, their writings offering insights into the college's history and the evolution of magical thought across centuries of academic inquiry. Some of these texts discuss events and places long lost to history, describing cities that no longer exist, magical techniques that modern mages cannot replicate, and historical figures whose names have faded from common memory, but whose contributions to magical advancement shape the world in ways we still experience without recognizing their source. The independence from the Mages Guild. Unlike similar institutions in other provinces, the College of Winterhold maintained complete independence from the Mages Guild, never submitting to the administrative oversight or ideological constraints that organization imposed on its member institutions across Tamriel. This independence proved crucial during various crises that affected the broader magical community, allowing the college to pursue its own policies and research directions without needing to coordinate with or obtain permission from distant bureaucrats who might not understand or care about Skyrim's unique magical traditions and needs. Most significantly, this independence meant the college never adopted the Mages Guild's prohibition on necromancy, viewing the practice not as inherently evil, but as a tool that could be studied and applied responsibly by properly trained mages, though the college strongly discouraged practicing necromancy outside its controlled environment, where accidents and ethical violations could be contained and addressed. This stance contributed to the Nordic public's distrust of the college, as most ordinary citizens viewed necromancy with horror and suspicion, unable to distinguish between academic study of death magic and the malevolent activities of rogue necromancers who raise the dead for evil purposes, creating guilt by association that college mages struggled to overcome. The schools of magic and their masters. The college organizes its curriculum around the traditional schools of magic, each discipline represented by an instructor who has achieved mastery in their chosen field and now dedicates their time to passing knowledge to the next generation of mages. Tolfdir, the alteration instructor, appears absent-minded and eccentric, but is actually one of the finest alteration scholars in all Tamriel. His expertise so profound that his seemingly foolish behavior masks a brilliant mind capable of insights that elude more conventional thinkers. Feralda guards the college entrance and teaches destruction magic, her specialization in the most overtly powerful school, making her an appropriate first test for prospective students who must demonstrate at least rudimentary magical ability before gaining admission. Drevis Naloran handles illusion instruction. His expertise in perception manipulation and mental magic reflected in his own preference for privacy and his tendency to avoid unnecessary social interaction that might distract from his research. Finis Gestor teaches conjuration and is considered one of the greatest conjurers in Skyrim, capable of summoning entities that lesser mages wouldn't dare attempt to contact, let alone bind and command for extended periods. Restoration's controversial status. Colette Marance, the restoration instructor, struggles with her school's diminished prestige within the college, as many mages view healing magic and protective wards as lesser accomplishments compared to the flashier displays possible through destruction or the exotic entities summoned through conjuration. She delivers an impassioned speech defending restoration's value, pointing out that wards have become essential tools for mages working in dangerous situations, that healing spells keep practitioners alive when experiments go wrong, or expeditions encounter unexpected threats, and that dismissing these practical applications as mundane demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of magic's purpose and utility. Her frustration reflects a broader tension within magical education between theoretical advancement and practical application, with some mages pursuing knowledge for its own sake, while others focus on how magic can solve real problems and improve people's lives, a divide that sometimes leads to interdepartmental tensions and subtle hierarchies that undermine the collaborative spirit the college theoretically promotes. The Midden's dark secrets. Beneath the college's visible structures lies the Midden, a warren of icy tunnels and abandoned chambers where the remnants of failed experiments and forgotten research projects slowly decay in the darkness, creating an underworld that most students avoid, except when specifically required to venture there for training exercises or item retrieval quests. The Midden connects various parts of the college through hidden passages, some of which lead to the surface outside the college grounds, providing alternative routes that might prove useful during emergencies or when someone wishes to move unseen by the faculty or fellow students. Ice wraiths haunt some sections, their ethereal forms drifting through frozen corridors like malevolent snowflakes, attacking anyone who intrudes on their territory with magical cold that can freeze flesh and shatter bones if the victim lacks adequate protection. Draugr occasionally animate in the deeper levels, suggesting the Midden might have been built on, or incorporates parts of older Nordic ruins, their tombs disturbed by the college's excavations, or simply awakened by the ambient magical energy that suffuses every stone of the institution, drawn to consciousness by forces they don't understand, but instinctively oppose. Atronach forges ancient power. Deep within the Midden sits the Atronach Forge, a mystical device of unknown origin capable of conjuring various types of Atronachs and other entities when supplied with appropriate materials and activated using correct rituals that few modern mages fully understand. The forge predates the college, suggesting it might have been constructed by earlier civilizations who occupied this location before the Nords established Winterhold. Its magical principles based on knowledge that has since been lost or deliberately suppressed due to the dangers inherent in unrestricted access to such power. Students who discover the forge can experiment with different combinations of ingredients, learning through trial and error which materials produce which results, occasionally creating items or summoning entities that provide valuable rewards for those brave or foolish enough to risk the forge's unpredictable nature. The forge's very existence raises questions about the Midden's true purpose and history, suggesting the college might have been built specifically to contain or study this artifact, with the visible institution serving as both research facility and security measure, preventing unauthorized access to a power that could prove catastrophic in the wrong hands. The augur of Dunlane's tragic transformation. Within the Midden's depths dwells the augur of Dunlane, a former student whose experiments with powerful magic went catastrophically wrong, transforming him from a promising young mage into a being of pure magical energy, his physical form consumed by forces he attempted to harness but couldn't fully control. The augur exists as a sentient magical field, capable of communication and apparently retaining his consciousness and memories despite having lost everything that made him physically human, trapped in a state that blurs the line between living being and arcane phenomenon. He can offer advice and insights to those who seek him out, his perspective unique given his direct experience with magic at a fundamental level most mages only theorize about, though his cryptic manner of speaking and tendency toward vague pronouncements sometimes makes his guidance more confusing than helpful. The college faculty knows about the augur and occasionally consults him on particularly difficult problems, treating him as a resource despite the tragedy his existence represents and the uncomfortable questions it raises about the risks inherent in magical research and the potential consequences when ambition outpaces wisdom. Sarthel's ancient significance. The discovery of Sarthel's ruins beneath the ice marked a pivotal moment in the college's recent history, as excavation revealed not only Nordic ruins from the earliest days of human settlement in Skyrim, but also something far stranger and more powerful hidden in those ancient halls. Sarthel holds tremendous historical importance as the first human city in Skyrim, established by Ysgramor and his companions after they fled from Atmora, representing the beginning of the Nordic civilization that would eventually come to dominate the region and establish the cultural traditions that persist to this day. The city was destroyed during the Night of Tears when snow elves attacked, slaughtering most of its inhabitants in an assault that sparked centuries of warfare between Nords and the former, transforming what might have been peaceful coexistence into genocidal conflict that nearly exterminated the snow elves and drove the survivors to desperate measures that ultimately degraded them into the twisted creatures that now haunt Skyrim's darkest places. The Eye of Magnus discovery. During excavations led by Tolfdir, college researchers discovered the Eye of Magnus buried deep within Sarthel's ruins, an artifact of such immense power and mysterious origin that its very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the world's history and the limits of magical possibility. The eye appears to be a massive sphere of pure magical energy, its surface swirling with patterns that hurt to look at directly, emanating power at levels that make even the most accomplished mages feel like children dabbling with forces they barely comprehend. No one knows who created the eye, when it was made, or what its original purpose might have been, though speculation ranges from it being a tool of the Old Ones to theories that it represents the focused will of Magnus himself, the architect of Mundus, who withdrew from creation when he realized the trap Lorcan had laid for the Aedra. The Eye's discovery attracted immediate attention from the Psijic Order, that mysterious organization of mages who rarely intervene in worldly affairs. their appearance suggesting they understood the eye's significance and potential dangers better than anyone at the college, and felt compelled to take action despite their usual policy of observation over intervention. Ancano's Thalmor, connection, Ancano, presented as an advisor from the Thalmor, served as the college's first warning that the Eye of Magnus had attracted interest from forces whose goals extended far beyond academic curiosity or the advancement of magical knowledge. The Thalmor assigned him to the college under the pretense of fostering cooperation and cultural exchange, though his true mission involved monitoring the college's activities and seizing opportunities to advance the Thalmor's mysterious agenda, which involves goals few outside their inner circles fully understand. Ancano recognized the eye's potential immediately, seeing in its power an opportunity to accomplish something that would advance the Thalmor's long-term plans and perhaps elevate his own position within that organization, his ambition and ruthlessness making him willing to risk catastrophic consequences if it meant achieving what he perceived as a greater good that justified any immediate cost. His tampering with the eye created magical barriers that sealed the college, generating anomalies throughout Winterhold that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality itself, demonstrating that warnings about the artifact's dangers were not merely theoretical concerns, but genuine existential threats that required immediate action to prevent apocalyptic disaster. The Staff of Magnus quest. Recognizing that the Staff of Magnus might be the only tool capable of controlling or containing the eye, the college sent their newest member on a desperate quest to Labyrinthian, where legends suggested Shalidor had stored the staff among other powerful artifacts in his maze designed to test the worthiness of those who sought such power. The quest led through the ruins of Bromjunar, past the restless dead who had once served the dragon cult and now haunted their former temple as mindless guardians protecting nothing but the memory of a civilization that had crumbled millennia ago. The journey culminated in a confrontation with the dragon priest Morokei, one of the most powerful servants of the dragons. His power sustained across ages through dark rituals and the enslavement of two mages whom Salvos Aren had sacrificed in a desperate bid to contain the priest when a previous expedition went catastrophically wrong. Defeating Morokei and claiming the staff represented only the beginning of the crisis's resolution, as the staff itself proved to be merely a tool that required knowledge and courage to wield effectively, not a simple solution that would automatically fix everything once obtained. Salvos Aren's tragic past. Archmage Salvos Aren carried tremendous guilt throughout his tenure as college leader, his secret shame stemming from events during his youth when he led an expedition into Labyrinthian that resulted in the deaths of most of his companions and permanent trauma for those who survived. Savos, Atma, and 4 other young mages ventured into the ruins seeking glory and knowledge, their confidence outpacing their wisdom, as so often happens with talented youth who have yet to learn that power alone cannot protect them from every danger. Half the group perished in the outer ruins, killed by traps, hostile creatures, or their own mistakes as they pushed deeper into Bromjunar without adequate preparation or understanding of what they faced. The surviving 3 reached Morokei's chamber, where they confronted the dragon priest, only to discover they lacked the power to destroy him, forcing Savos to make an impossible choice that haunted him for the rest of his life, weighing on his conscience every day he served as Archmage, the enthralled mage's eternal service. To contain Morokei when direct confrontation proved impossible, Savos performed a terrible spell that killed his remaining companions, Atma and Hafna Icefist. then immediately raised them as spectral guardians bound to maintain a magical ward, preventing the dragon priest from escaping his chamber. These enthralled mages remained at their posts for decades, their spirits trapped in endless service, maintaining the ward even as their consciousness slowly degraded from the strain of containing such malevolent power for so long. When the Dragonborn finally reaches Moroki's chamber, these same spectral mages still stand guard, their forms ethereal and hollow, sustained by nothing but the spell Savos cast and the lingering traces of their own determination to finish the task. They began when they were still young and alive. Freeing them requires defeating Moroki, breaking the spell that binds them to their eternal vigil, finally granting them the rest they should have received decades earlier when Savos made his terrible choice in the darkness of an ancient tomb. The Great Collapse of 4E122. The Great Collapse transformed Winterhold from a thriving city into a handful of scattered buildings clinging to the edge of a cliff, most of its districts plunging into the Sea of Ghosts during a catastrophic series of storms that defied natural explanation and left survivors traumatized by the sheer scale of destruction they had witnessed. The disaster occurred suddenly, with massive waves battering the city's coastal districts before the ground itself gave way, stone and earth crumbling as if the very bones of the world had decided to reject the weight of human civilization. Entire neighborhoods vanished in moments, taking with them thousands of residents who had no warning and no chance to escape, their homes becoming tombs as buildings collapsed and fell into churning waters that swallowed everything without mercy. The few survivors gathered in the remaining structures, shocked and grieving, struggling to process what had happened and what it meant for their future, as they realized their great city had been reduced to a shadow of its former self in the span of a single terrible night. The college's mysterious survival. Throughout the catastrophe, the College of Winterhold remained completely untouched, its structures showing no damage whatsoever despite standing immediately adjacent to districts that fell into the sea, creating an almost supernatural boundary between destruction and preservation that seemed too perfect to be coincidental. This miraculous survival immediately aroused suspicion among the remaining population, who wondered how the college could have emerged unscathed unless its mages had known what was coming, or worse, had somehow caused the disaster through their experiments with forces they didn't fully understand or couldn't adequately control. The college maintained that ancient magical protections placed on their buildings by previous generations of mages had shielded them from the collapse. Their survival nothing more than effective engineering and foresight, rather than evidence of guilt or prior knowledge. However, this explanation satisfied few among the traumatized survivors, who needed someone to blame for the tragedy that had destroyed their lives, and found convenient scapegoats in the mages who had always occupied an uneasy position in Nordic society. Theories about the collapse's cause. Multiple theories attempt to explain what caused the Great Collapse, though none can be definitively proven, leaving the true cause shrouded in uncertainty that will likely never be fully resolved, given the passage of time and lack of concrete evidence. Some college members speculate that the collapse represented far-reaching consequences of Red Mountain's eruption in Morrowind, suggesting seismic disturbances propagated across vast distances beneath the Earth's surface before finally manifesting in Winterhold's destruction, though this theory struggles to explain why similar destruction didn't occur in other coastal regions, or why the effects took over a century to appear if they truly stemmed from the Red Year. Others suspect the college's own experiments might have destabilized local reality, with accumulating magical energies finally reaching a critical threshold that triggered catastrophic physical consequences the mages neither intended nor anticipated. A few theorists propose that tampering with the Eye of Magnus by future events somehow reached backward through time to cause the collapse, creating a causal loop where the disaster's true origin lies in events that haven't yet occurred from our current temporal perspective, making prevention impossible because the cause exists outside normal chronology. The permanent damage to college-city relations, the Great Collapse, poisoned relationships between the college and Winterhold's remaining population in ways that never fully healed, creating permanent distrust that infected every interaction between mages and ordinary citizens for generations. Parents warned their children to avoid the college, merchants charged mages higher prices for goods, and guards responded more slowly to calls for help from college members, creating an atmosphere of low-level hostility that made life difficult for everyone while solving nothing and preventing the cooperation that might have actually helped the city recover. Jarl Corir, who grew up in post-collapse Winterhold, absorbed this distrust from childhood, his entire worldview shaped by the ruins that surrounded him and the stories of lost glory he heard from traumatized elders, making him perhaps the most vocally anti-college political leader in Skyrim's recent history. He openly accuses the college of causing or at least failing to prevent the collapse, holding them responsible for the city's decline despite having no evidence beyond the suspicious circumstances of their survival. His accusations reflecting broader Nordic prejudices against magic rather than any genuine proof of wrongdoing. The economic aftermath. Following the collapse, Winterhold's economy never recovered its previous prosperity, the city becoming dependent on the college it simultaneously resented, a bitter irony not lost on residents who understood their survival, relied on serving the very institution they blamed for their troubles. The frozen hearth, Winterhold's sole remaining inn, survives primarily by serving college members and travelers visiting the institution, its owner Dagur providing rooms and meals to a clientele that diminished dramatically after the disaster scattered most of the region's population. Other businesses either closed entirely or relocated to more prosperous holds, taking their wealth and expertise elsewhere, leaving behind only those too stubborn, too poor, or too attached to their homeland to abandon what little remained of once great Winterhold. The decline became self-reinforcing as young people left seeking opportunities that no longer existed locally, reducing the population further and making recovery even less likely, trapping the city in a downward spiral from which it has never escaped. The Dunmer refugee crisis. Years before the collapse, Winterhold experienced dramatic demographic changes as Dunmer refugees fled Morrowind, following Red Mountain's eruption, seeking safety in foreign lands that often viewed them with suspicion and hostility. Many refugees settled in Winterhold, bringing their culture, mercantile skills, and scholarly traditions, temporarily revitalizing the city's economy and academic life through fresh perspectives and different approaches to problems that had become stale through over-familiarity. However, this influx also generated tension with the existing Nordic population, who resented the sudden presence of outsiders in their city, blamed them for various social problems whether justified or not, and felt their traditional way of life threatened by the cultural differences the Dunmer represented. When the collapse occurred, many surviving Nords immediately blamed the Dunmer and their suspected connections to dark magic, their prejudices seeking confirmation in tragedy and finding it through logic, twisted by trauma and existing resentment. The Oblivion Crisis's impact. The Oblivion Crisis devastated Winterhold and the surrounding region, with Daedric forces pouring through gates that opened across the hold, attacking settlements and terrorizing a population unprepared for such otherworldly threats. College mages formed part of the defense, using their magical expertise to fight Daedra and close gates that less skilled combatants couldn't approach without being overwhelmed by the exotic dangers those portals presented. However, rather than earning gratitude for their service, the mages' effectiveness during the crisis paradoxically increased suspicion among ordinary Nords, who wondered why mages seemed so prepared to fight Daedra unless they had prior knowledge of the invasion, or even some involvement in causing it. This represents classic scapegoating logic, where marginalized groups cannot win regardless of their actions, blamed both for problems and for the very effectiveness of their solutions to those problems, creating a no-win situation that forces them into defensive positions where any response can be interpreted as further evidence of guilt. The Chill Prison's unique punishment. Unlike other holds that maintain traditional jails, Winterhold sends criminals to the Chill, a frozen cave on a glacial island far north of the city, where they must survive in isolation guarded only by 4 frost atronachs who maintain the prison without need for food, sleep, or wages. This punishment combines exile with the harsh test of Skyrim's most extreme climate, ensuring that only the hardiest prisoners survive their sentences, while those who lack sufficient survival skills or winter knowledge simply freeze to death, their bodies preserved in ice until spring thaws reveal their failure. The Chill represents Nordic justice in its purest form, stripping away civilized pretense to reveal the fundamental belief that survival demonstrates worthiness while death proves the god's judgment that someone deserved their fate. Guards escort convicted criminals to the Chill's entrance, leaving them to face whatever awaits inside without appeal or second chances, their survival or demise becoming their own responsibility once the iron door closes behind them. Fort Kastav's strategic position. Fort Kastav stands as Winterhold Hold's only remaining military installation, its garrison maintaining watch over approaches to the hold and protecting against bandits, monsters, or hostile forces that might threaten the region's already diminished security. The fort occupies a strategically valuable position overlooking key routes, its location chosen by military engineers who understood terrain and fortification, ensuring their structure could be defended by relatively small forces against much larger attackers if necessary. During Skyrim's civil war, Fort Kastav becomes a contested objective, its control potentially tipping the balance of power in the region by providing whichever faction holds it with a secure base from which to launch operations or defend territory against enemy advances. The fort's very existence provides Winterhold with minimal military deterrence, preventing the hold from being completely ignored by potential enemies who might otherwise have seized the region's resources without resistance. The Frozen Hearth's persistent hospitality. Daga operates the Frozen Hearth with determination that borders on stubbornness, maintaining his inn despite having few customers and little reason to believe business will ever improve to sustainable levels. He represents the resilient spirit of Winterhold's remaining residents, people who refuse to abandon their home despite every rational argument suggesting they should leave for more prosperous regions where opportunities exist and futures seem possible. His wife Haran works alongside him, the couple supporting each other through difficult times, their partnership demonstrating the bonds that keep communities together even when external circumstances would tear them apart. The inn serves as the social center for Winterhold's tiny remaining population, a place where residents gather to share news, complain about the college, and temporarily forget the ruins that surround them, finding human connection in a settlement that often feels more dead than alive. Berna's oddment shop. Berna runs the general store, selling odds and ends to anyone willing to buy, though her inventory consists mostly of items that no one particularly wants or needs, reflecting the difficulty of maintaining commerce in a region that can barely support itself economically. She seems perpetually optimistic despite circumstances that would crush spirits less determined, constantly pitching items to customers who clearly have no interest. Her enthusiasm for sales, either genuine passion for commerce or elaborate defense mechanism against acknowledging the futility of her situation. Berna possesses the Coral Dragon Claw, an artifact needed to explore Ingle Barrow, which she sells for a modest price despite its archaeological significance. Her pragmatic approach to business, prioritizing immediate profit over historical preservation, understandable for someone struggling to survive economically. Kralda's alternative leadership. If Stormcloaks lose control of Winterhold during the Civil War, Jarl Kralda replaces Korir as the Hold's leader, bringing a somewhat different perspective to governance, though facing the same fundamental challenges that have plagued Winterhold since the collapse. Kralda trusts Archmage Aren's assurances that the college wasn't involved in the disaster, showing more willingness to work cooperatively with the mages than his predecessor ever demonstrated, though local prejudices remain strong enough that even his more tolerant attitude cannot completely heal the rifts that have developed over decades. His leadership represents possibility of reconciliation between city and college, though whether such reconciliation can actually occur depends on both groups being willing to move past grievances that have become comfortable, even as they prove destructive. The Dragon Priest Mask's power. Throughout Skyrim's ruins, Dragon Priest masks represent some of the most powerful equipment available to those brave and skilled enough to defeat their terrifying owners, each mask granting unique enchantments that reflect its bearer's particular magical specializations and personality traits. Moroki's mask, obtained during the quest for the Staff of Magnus, increases magicka regeneration by 100%, making it invaluable for mages who rely on sustained spellcasting and need their power to recover quickly between encounters. These masks date back to the Dragon Cult's height, when priests wielded authority second only to their dragon masters, their magical knowledge so advanced that modern mages struggle to replicate their achievements, suggesting ancient civilizations understood arcane principles that subsequent generations have forgotten or abandoned. Collecting multiple masks unlocks additional secrets, with a special mask becoming available to those who gather enough of the others and know where to look, rewarding dedicated explorers with power that justifies the dangers they faced obtaining each individual piece. Ingle Barrow's ghostly guardian. Ingle Barrow serves as the tomb of Ingle, brother to Isgramor himself, whose death during the journey from Amora to Skyrim became the subject of poems and legends that preserve his memory across millennia. The barrow contains typical Nordic burial goods and Draugr guardians protecting their master's rest from those who would disturb it, though the tomb's most distinctive feature involves mysterious lights that appear under certain conditions, dancing through the chambers like living things with purposes of their own. These lights, called Ingle's Shade by locals, seem to possess rudimentary intelligence, responding to intruders' presence and sometimes leading them toward danger or treasure depending on moods that remain unknowable to living visitors. Whether these lights represent Ingle's spirit, some magical defense mechanism created by those who sealed the tomb, or natural phenomena that happen to occur in locations with specific magical properties remains uncertain, adding another layer of mystery to a region already thick with questions that have no definitive answers. The Whistling Mine's valuable iron. Despite Winterhold's decline, the Whistling Mine continues operations under the ownership of Gyak, producing iron ore that provides modest economic benefit to the hold and employment for a handful of miners who work its depths. The mine takes its name from the sound wind makes when it blows through specific shafts, creating an eerie whistling that echoes through the tunnels, unsettling new workers until they grow accustomed to the noise and learn to recognize when it indicates dangerous pressure, changes versus harmless acoustic phenomena. Mining represents dangerous work under the best circumstances, with cave-ins, bad air, and equipment failures claiming lives regularly enough that most miners develop fatalistic attitudes about survival, viewing each day they emerge safely from the earth as borrowed time rather than guaranteed right. Courier's son and missing apprentices. Jarl, Courier's son, vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances, disappearing so completely that no evidence of his fate has ever been discovered, despite extensive searches and investigation by those who cared about him. Courier suspects the college played some role in his son's disappearance, perhaps through a magical accident or experiment gone wrong that the mages covered up to avoid responsibility, though he possesses no proof beyond his existing prejudices and the suspicious timing of events. This personal tragedy deepened Courier's hatred of the college, transforming abstract resentment into visceral loathing, born of parental grief and the terrible uncertainty that comes from never knowing what happened to a child, forever wondering if they might still be alive somewhere, suffering alone, waiting for rescue that will never come. The college denies any knowledge of the disappearance, maintaining they had no contact with Courier's son and suggesting he might have fallen victim to any of countless dangers that claim lives in Skyrim's wilderness, though this explanation satisfies no one and only increases tensions between the two groups. The Imperial versus Stormcloak control. During Skyrim's civil war, Winterhold typically aligns with the Stormcloaks under Courier's leadership. His Nordic nationalism and resentment of imperial authority aligning perfectly with Ulfric's rebellion against what he perceives as foreign control over Skyrim's destiny. However, military campaigns might shift control to the Empire, installing Krolder as Jarl and bringing the hold nominally under imperial jurisdiction, though the practical impact on daily life remains minimal given Winterhold's isolation and lack of strategic importance to either faction's broader war aims. The civil war barely touches Winterhold beyond changing who sits in the Jarl's longhouse. The hold's poverty and distance from major supply lines, making it unattractive for military operations that require resources and infrastructure the region simply cannot provide. Both sides largely ignore Winterhold, except when propaganda value demands acknowledging every hold's allegiance, making the local population's sufferings and loyalties irrelevant to commanders focused on controlling more prosperous regions whose loss or gain might actually affect the war's outcome. Mount Anthor's Dragon Lair. Mount Anthor rises north of Winterhold, its peak providing a commanding view of the surrounding wilderness and serving as lair to dragons who appreciate the tactical advantages high ground provides when hunting or defending territory. The mountain slopes challenge climbers with steep grades and treacherous footing, especially during winter storms that reduce visibility to arm's length and create conditions where even experienced mountaineers can easily become disoriented and wander off cliffs or into crevasses that offer no escape. Dragons that nest on Antor patrol the region's skies, their presence keeping other creatures at bay through sheer intimidation, as few things willingly contest territory with apex predators capable of incinerating threats from hundreds of feet away. Confronting dragons on their own ground requires either tremendous courage or exceptional foolishness, characteristics that fortunately often coincide in the adventurers who choose to scale hostile mountains seeking combat with flying reptiles that breathe fire or frost. Septimus Cygnus's isolated research, north of Winterhold, in a tiny outpost, perched precariously on floating ice, lives Septimus Cygnus, a brilliant scholar driven mad by his obsessive pursuit of knowledge that mortals were never meant to possess. He studies the Dwemer and their mysterious disappearance with single-minded intensity that has consumed everything else in his life, reducing him to a hermit whose only companions are the voices in his head and the occasional visitor brave or curious enough to seek him out. Septimus serves Hermaeus Mora, whether he fully comprehends this relationship or not, his research guided by whispers from the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, his mind gradually being reshaped by contact with forces that care nothing for his sanity or well-being, viewing him as merely another tool to be used and discarded when he ceases providing value. His quest involves a mysterious Dwemer lockbox and the harvesting of blood from various mirror races, tasks that lead down increasingly dark paths as he pursues objectives whose true purpose he doesn't understand, blindly following instructions that will ultimately result in his destruction, while believing he approaches the greatest discovery of his life. The college's continuing research, despite its troubles and the surrounding hostility, the college continues pursuing magical research and education, maintaining traditions of scholarship that have persisted for centuries, regardless of external circumstances or public opinion. Students arrive from across Skyrim and beyond, drawn by the institution's reputation and the opportunity to study with masters who understand their chosen disciplines at levels impossible to find elsewhere. Classes continue daily, with instructors teaching fundamental magical theory, advanced spellcasting techniques, and the ethical considerations that must guide any responsible practitioner's application of arcane power. The library grows slowly as new texts arrive through purchase or donation, each edition catalogued meticulously by Urag Gro-Shub, who treats every book as a precious treasure deserving preservation and respect. The Hall of Countenance and Student Housing. The Hall of Countenance serves as student dormitory, providing basic accommodations for those who have progressed beyond apprentice status and earned the right to permanent rooms within the college, rather than temporary quarters in the Hall of Attainment. Each room contains a bed, storage for personal belongings, and just enough space for students to conduct minor experiments or practice spells without disturbing neighbors, though the thin walls ensure that any significant magical mishap immediately becomes common knowledge as residents rush to help or flee, depending on the nature and severity of the accident. Living in close proximity creates bonds between students who might otherwise never interact given their different specializations and backgrounds, forcing them to develop tolerance and understanding that proves valuable when they eventually work together on complex projects requiring multiple magical disciplines. The Archmage's Quarters' Hidden Treasures. The Archmage's Quarters contain numerous valuable items accumulated by previous holders of that office, their personal possessions left behind when they died or retired, creating a collection that represents centuries of magical scholarship and accumulation. The new Archmage gains access to these resources, finding potions, soul gems, enchanted items, and other treasures that previous leaders stored for safekeeping or simply forgot about in the press of administrative duties and personal research. A bed provides rest in luxurious surroundings compared to standard student accommodations, while extensive storage allows the archmage to keep their own possessions organized and secure from students who might be tempted to borrow items without permission. The quarter's location atop the Hall of Elements symbolizes the archmage's elevated position, while also isolating them from daily college life, a blessing and curse depending on whether the current archmage values privacy over accessibility. Magical anomalies and their danger. When Ancano tampers with the Eye of Magnus, magical anomalies spawn throughout Winterhold, appearing as floating orbs of chaotic energy that attack anything living in their vicinity, their very existence violating natural laws and threatening reality's stability. These anomalies resist conventional attacks, their immaterial nature making physical weapons largely useless, while their magical composition allows them to shrug off many spells that would destroy normal creatures. Combat with anomalies requires either powerful magic or enchanted weapons capable of affecting ethereal entities, turning what appear to be simple floating lights into genuine threats that can kill unprepared opponents before they realize the danger. The anomaly's appearance convinces even skeptical residents that the college has finally lost control of its experiments, proving what many had long suspected about the dangers of unrestricted magical research and the mage's inability to contain the forces they so casually summon and manipulate. The bridge's symbolic importance. The bridge connecting Winterhold to the college represents more than simple architecture, serving as physical manifestation of the relationship between the two groups, a liminal space where town and institution meet without fully merging. Feralda guards this threshold, ensuring that only those with magical ability or compelling reasons gain access to the college beyond, her presence sending clear message that not everyone is welcome to cross this boundary and enter the space mages have carved out for themselves. The bridge's survival through the Great Collapse seems almost miraculous, given that much sturdier structures fell into the sea, leading some to speculate it receives magical reinforcement that prevents its collapse, though whether such reinforcement existed before the disaster or was added afterward to prevent the college's complete isolation remains unclear. Crossing the bridge often involves confronting one's own assumptions and prejudices about magic, a psychological journey that mirrors the physical passage from one location to another. Tolfdir's absent-minded brilliance. Tolfdir's apparent absent-mindedness masks profound intelligence and deep magical understanding, his eccentric behavior reflecting a mind so focused on theoretical problems that he sometimes forgets mundane concerns like where he placed his alembic or whether he ate breakfast that morning. Students who initially dismiss him as a foolish old man gradually realize he possesses knowledge they desperately need and insights they cannot achieve without his guidance, transforming him from object of gentle mockery into respected teacher whose approval carries genuine weight. His teaching method emphasizes experimentation and discovery over rote memorization, encouraging students to develop their own understanding rather than simply accepting what others tell them, an approach that produces either brilliant independent thinkers or spectacular failures depending on each student's aptitude and temperament. After Mirabelle's death, Tolfdir assumes the role of Master Wizard, bringing his unique perspective to administrative duties while maintaining his teaching responsibilities, demonstrating that even absent-minded professors can rise to leadership when circumstances demand their service. The Psijic Order's rare intervention. the Sijic Order's involvement in the Eye of Magnus situation represents one of their rare direct interventions in Tamrielic affairs, their usual policy favoring observation and study over active participation in events that might be better left to develop without outside interference. Members of this mysterious organization, based on the island of Artaeum, which periodically vanishes from the world only to reappear decades or centuries later, possess magical knowledge that surpasses most mortal mages. Their extended lifespans and isolation, allowing them to pursue research and contemplation that others cannot sustain. Quaranir and his colleagues recognize the Eye's danger immediately, understanding its potential to destroy not just the college, but possibly reality itself, if Ancano's tampering destabilizes it beyond repair, making their intervention necessary despite their preference for non-involvement. After defeating Ancano, the Sijics take custody of the Eye, removing it from Tamriel to some undisclosed location where it can be studied safely or simply contained away from those who might abuse its power. Their ability to accomplish this feat, demonstrating capabilities far beyond what the college's mages could manage using their own resources and knowledge. The Dragonborn's ascension to Archmage. The Dragonborn's rapid rise from newest apprentice to Archmage occurs within an incredibly compressed time frame that would normally require decades of study and political maneuvering. Their advancement driven by crisis rather than traditional academic achievement or administrative experience. This meteoric rise causes some resentment among long-serving faculty who have dedicated their lives to the college only to be passed over for leadership in favor of someone who joined days or weeks earlier. Though most recognize that stopping Ancano and saving the college from destruction represents accomplishment that justifies the promotion regardless of how it violates normal procedures. The new Archmage inherits not just an office and title, but tremendous responsibility for an institution facing existential threats both external and internal. Their decisions potentially determining whether the college survives to see another century or finally collapses under the weight of public hostility and its own internal problems. Leading the college requires balancing research with public relations, maintaining academic standards while addressing practical concerns, and somehow finding path forward for an institution that many believe should not exist at all. Winterhold's architectural mysteries and lost districts. Before the Great Collapse transformed Winterhold into a handful of buildings clinging desperately to a cliff edge, the city sprawled across multiple districts, each with its own character, purpose, and population, creating an urban landscape that rivaled solitude in complexity and exceeded it in certain specialized functions. The marketplace district hummed with commerce from dawn until well past dark, merchants displaying goods from across Tamriel, while buyers haggled over prices and quality, their voices creating a constant background noise that residents found comforting in its predictability, and merchants interpreted as the sound of prosperity itself. Residential quarters housed families in the buildings ranging from modest single-room apartments to elaborate estates, where wealthy families displayed their success through architecture that combined practical Nordic design with decorative flourishes imported from other provinces, creating hybrid styles that reflected Winterhold's cosmopolitan nature before isolation and disaster reduced it to provincial backwater. The temple district contained shrines to various divines, with impressive structures dedicated to the most popular deities, while smaller altars served those with more specialized followings, ensuring that all spiritual needs could be met without requiring worshippers to travel elsewhere for religious services. Administrative buildings clustered near the Jarl's Longhouse, their proximity to power making them convenient for officials who spent their days implementing policies, collecting taxes, settling disputes, and performing the countless mundane tasks that keep any functioning government operating smoothly, even when its actions remain invisible to most citizens. The Harbour District's maritime legacy. Winterhold's harbour once bustled with activity as ships arrived carrying trade goods, passengers, and news from distant lands, their presence connecting the isolated northern hold to broader Tamrielic commerce and culture. Docks extended into the Sea of Ghosts, their pilings driven deep into the seafloor to withstand the powerful waves that regularly battered the coast, while warehouses stored goods awaiting transport inland or ships arriving to carry them elsewhere. Fishermen worked these waters despite their danger, hauling catches that fed the city and provided surplus for export to less fortunately positioned settlements that lacked direct ocean access. Shipbuilders maintained yards where vessels received construction, repair, and refitting. Their specialized knowledge passed down through generations of families who had devoted themselves to understanding how wood, sail, and rope could be combined to create craft capable of surviving northern seas that showed no mercy to poorly constructed vessels or incompetent crews. The harbour's destruction during the Great Collapse eliminated Winterhold's maritime connections overnight, transforming it from a city that looked outward toward the wider world into an isolated settlement that could barely maintain contact with other regions of Skyrim, its economy crippled by the sudden loss of trade routes that had sustained it for centuries. The Scholars' Quarter and academic life. Beyond the college itself, Winterhold hosted a Scholars' Quarter where researchers, historians, and philosophers resided, drawn to the city by its libraries, institutions, and the intellectual community that had developed around the college's presence. These scholars pursued studies across countless disciplines, from ancient history to natural philosophy, their work contributing to human knowledge even when it produced no immediate practical applications, advancing understanding for its own sake rather than pursuing specific utilitarian goals. Private libraries accumulated in wealthy scholars' homes, their collections sometimes rivaling smaller institutional holdings, created through lifetimes of careful acquisition and preservation of texts that their owners deemed valuable enough to warrant the expense and effort required to obtain them. Discussion groups met regularly in taverns, homes, and public spaces, their members debating everything from theological questions to practical problems of engineering, their conversations sometimes passionate but generally civil, reflecting shared commitment to reason and evidence over emotion and tradition. The Great Collapse scattered this community irreparably, with most surviving scholars relocating to other cities where they could continue their work in environments less traumatized by recent catastrophe, taking with them knowledge and perspectives that Winterhold has never successfully replaced, despite occasional attempts to revive its former academic glory. The pre-collapse population and demographics. At its height, Winterhold's population numbered in the thousands, making it one of Skyrim's larger cities despite its northern location and the harsh climate that made survival more challenging than in more temperate regions. Nords dominated numerically as expected in a city located in Skyrim's heartland, but substantial populations of other races lived and worked in various districts, creating multicultural environment where different perspectives and traditions coexisted with varying degrees of harmony. High elves often found positions in the college or related scholarly institutions, their natural affinity for magic and long lifespans making them well suited for careers requiring extended study and patience that shorter-lived races found difficult to sustain. Dunmer merchants operated businesses in the commercial districts. Their mercantile expertise honed over generations, allowing them to identify profitable opportunities that others overlooked or dismissed as too risky. Bretons with magical inclinations gravitated toward the college, while those with commercial interests joined the city's trading houses. Their mixed human-elven heritage, allowing them to navigate both Nordic and Mer social contexts more easily than pure representatives of either group. Even Khajiit and Argonians could be found in smaller numbers, usually working in capacities that played to their particular strengths, with Khajiit operating as traders or information brokers, while Argonians often found employment in occupations requiring tolerance for cold and wet conditions that other races found unbearable. The economic renaissance before disaster. The years immediately preceding the Great Collapse marked a period of unusual prosperity for Winterhold, with economic indicators suggesting the city was experiencing genuine renaissance, rather than temporary upturn that would naturally reverse in subsequent years. The arrival of Dunmer refugees, despite initial social tensions, stimulated economic activity as these immigrants brought capital, connections, and entrepreneurial energy that had been declining among the long-established Nordic population that had grown complacent during decades of stability. New businesses opened at rates not seen in generations, with ambitious merchants taking risks on ventures that more conservative operators had dismissed as unlikely to succeed, creating competitive environment that forced everyone to innovate or risk being left behind by more aggressive competitors. Real estate values climbed steadily as increasing population created housing demand that exceeded available supply, leading to construction boom that provided employment for workers while generating profits for developers who correctly anticipated continued growth. The college acquired the Izmir Collective, its greatest library acquisition in centuries, attracting scholars from across Tamriel who wanted access to these rare texts, their presence further stimulating the local economy through spending on housing, food, and services. Tax revenues increased accordingly, allowing the Jarl to fund public works projects that had been deferred during leaner years, improving infrastructure and quality of life in ways that made the city more attractive to potential immigrants and investors considering where to allocate their resources. The night of the collapse. Survivor accounts. Those who survived the Great Collapse carried memories of that terrible night for the rest of their lives, their accounts describing chaos and terror that remain difficult to process even decades later, when time has supposedly dulled emotional impact. The disaster struck during the darkest hours before dawn, when most residents slept, robbing them of warning that might have allowed more to escape before their homes plunged into the sea. Survivors describe being thrown from beds by violent shaking, the ground moving beneath them in ways that defied natural experience, making them question whether they still dreamed until breaking glass, and screaming neighbors confirmed the nightmare's reality. Those who managed to reach windows or streets witnessed apocalyptic scenes, as entire buildings collapsed or simply slid sideways into darkness, the noise overwhelming as stone shattered and timber splintered while earth itself groaned under stresses it could not withstand. The sea of ghosts raged with waves far larger than any storm should produce, crashing into coastal districts with force that swept away everything in their path, leaving only empty foundations where homes and businesses had stood moments earlier. Panicked crowds fled toward higher ground, carrying children and whatever possessions they could grab, abandoning everything else in desperate race against destruction that pursued them through streets that crumbled even as they ran. Some tried to help trapped neighbors, digging frantically through rubble while ignoring their own danger, heroic efforts that sometimes succeeded, but more often simply added to the casualty count when another tremor brought down more buildings on rescuers and rescued alike. The dawn after devastation. When dawn finally arrived, survivors confronted devastation beyond anything their imaginations could have prepared them to witness. The city they had known literally vanished, except for the few structures that remained on stable ground. Where thriving neighborhoods had spread across the Cape, only empty air now existed, the land having fallen away to reveal cliff faces that dropped vertically into churning waters that still carried debris from buildings destroyed hours earlier. Bodies lay scattered among the ruins, some obviously dead, while others merely unconscious or in shock. Medics and volunteers moving among them, trying to identify who might still be saved and who had passed beyond any help mortal hands could provide. Survivors called out for missing family members, their voices hoarse from screaming, growing increasingly desperate as hours passed without response, suggesting their loved ones had perished in the initial collapse or drowned in the sea that had swallowed so much. The college stood completely intact, its spires and walls showing no damage whatsoever, creating jarring contrast with the utter devastation surrounding it. A contrast that immediately sparked questions about how such selective destruction could occur naturally and what it meant that only the Mage's buildings had survived. Attempts to organize rescue operations founded on lack of resources and leadership, the normal administrative structures having largely collapsed along with the city, leaving traumatized survivors to cope with disaster that exceeded any single person's ability to effectively manage or comprehend. The failed reconstruction efforts. In the weeks and months following the collapse, various individuals and groups attempted to organize reconstruction efforts, hoping to rebuild Winterhold to something approaching its former glory. But these initiatives consistently failed for reasons ranging from lack of funding to continued instability that made construction on the remaining land dangerously unpredictable. Engineers examining the surviving terrain expressed concerns about its stability, noting cracks and settlement that suggested additional collapses might occur, making any construction on those sites incredibly risky investments that few were willing to undertake, regardless of potential returns. The Hold's tax base had effectively disappeared along with most of its population, leaving the Jarl with insufficient revenues to fund public projects even if willing workers and materials could be obtained, creating a vicious cycle where inability to rebuild prevented economic recovery that might have generated resources needed for reconstruction. Surviving merchants relocated to other cities rather than attempting to restart businesses in ruins with no customers, taking their capital and expertise elsewhere, draining away resources that Winterhold desperately needed but could not retain or replace. Young people left in droves, seeking opportunities in regions not devastated by recent catastrophe, their departure aging the remaining population and further reducing the energy and optimism that any successful rebuilding effort would have required to overcome the enormous obstacles it faced. The college's isolation and self-sufficiency. Following the collapse, the college found itself effectively isolated despite remaining physically connected to Winterhold's remnants via the bridge. The surrounding population so diminished and hostile that mages could not rely on local support and had to develop self-sufficiency in areas where they had previously depended on the city's resources and services. The college established gardens and greenhouses where they grew food, using magical enhancement to overcome the harsh climate that normally made agriculture impossible so far north, ensuring adequate nutrition for members regardless of external supply interruptions. summoning, and transmutation magic allowed creation of basic goods that would otherwise require trade to acquire, with mages producing items ranging from tools to clothing through arcane means that required only will and knowledge rather than conventional raw materials. The institution became more insular and protective, restricting access to outsiders more strictly than before, leading to accusations of elitism from those who resented being excluded, even though the restrictions arose from legitimate security concerns about antagonistic locals who might sabotage or attack if given opportunity. This isolation, while necessary for survival, further poisoned relationships with Winterhold's remaining population, creating feedback loop where each group's defensive measures reinforce the other's suspicions, making reconciliation increasingly difficult as time passed and grievances accumulated on both sides. The necromancy controversy and public perception. The college's acceptance of necromancy as a legitimate field of study, while defended on academic freedom grounds, provided convenient focus for critics who wanted concrete examples of the institution's moral failings to justify their existing prejudices and hostility. Common Nords viewed raising the dead with horror rooted in religious beliefs about proper treatment of the deceased, and superstitious fears about what animated corpses might do if their controllers lost concentration or died, leaving them without direction, creating scenarios that seem plausible even if actual necromantic accidents rarely involved rampaging undead attacking innocent civilians. The college maintained that necromancy involved valuable magical principles whose study advanced overall understanding regardless of ethical controversies surrounding practical applications, arguing that knowledge itself was neutral and only applications could be judged good or evil based on intentions and consequences. This philosophical position satisfied academics comfortable with moral complexity, but failed to persuade ordinary people who saw clear distinction between acceptable and unacceptable magic, viewing necromancy as inherently wrong, regardless of academic arguments about theoretical value. Rumors circulated about college students practicing necromancy in the Midden, raising corpses for experiments that supposedly went wrong in ways administration covered up to avoid public outcry. Though these stories generally lacked credible evidence and seemed designed more to confirm existing biases than report actual events. The Thalmor presence and political tensions. Ancano's assignment to the college as Thalmor advisor represented the Aldmeri Dominion's attempt to extend influence into Skyrim's magical institutions, monitoring their activities and potentially manipulating them toward goals that served Thalmor interests rather than the college's own priorities or the broader good of Skyrim and its people. His presence generated resentment among faculty, who disliked having a political operative watching their work, questioning their methods, and potentially reporting their findings to foreign powers who might use that information in ways contrary to everyone's interests, except the Thalmor's own. The Thalmor's ban on Talos worship and their role in the White Gold Concordat made them deeply unpopular in Skyrim, where most Nords viewed the agreement as shameful capitulation, forced on a weakened empire by elves who had never forgiven humans for previous conflicts and sought to undermine Nordic culture through religious persecution disguised as necessary compromise. Ancano's relatively polite behavior and scholarly credentials could not overcome the automatic hostility many felt toward anyone associated with an organization they viewed as enemy to everything they valued, making his position at the college diplomatically and personally difficult even before his true intentions regarding the Eye of Magnus became apparent. The Eye of Magnus. Theories and speculation. The eye's true nature and purpose remain subject to intense speculation and theorizing among those who studied it during its brief presence at the college, with proposals ranging from mundane artifacts to fragments of divine power, each theory attempting to explain the artifact's immense power and mysterious properties through different frameworks and assumptions. Some scholars suggested the eye represented a tool used during Mundus's creation, perhaps an instrument Magnus himself wielded when designing the mortal plane, abandoned or lost during his withdrawal when he realized the true cost of Lorcan's plan. Others proposed it might be a prison containing something dangerous, its shell designed to contain rather than produce the energy that appeared to emanate from it, making any attempt to breach or activate it potentially catastrophic, as whatever lay imprisoned might escape. The eye's name suggests connection to Magnus, but whether this reflects actual divine origin or merely represents scholarly speculation that crystallized into conventional wisdom remains unclear, given the lack of reliable historical information about an artifact that predates written records and possibly predates mortal existence itself. Its discovery in Sarthal raises questions about how it arrived there, whether ancient Nords understood its significance, and whether the Night of Tears somehow involved conflict over the eye rather than representing simple territorial dispute as traditional histories suggest. Sarthal's archaeological significance. The excavation of Sarthal represents one of the most important archaeological projects undertaken in Skyrim during the Fourth Era, revealing details about early Nordic settlement that written records never preserved and answering long-standing questions about how Isgramor's followers lived when they first arrived from Atmora. The ruins contain typical elements of ancient Nordic architecture, with great halls for gatherings, sleeping quarters for residents, and storage areas for food and supplies, their layout reflecting social organization and priorities of a people establishing themselves in hostile territory, where survival depended on cooperation and effective resource management. Artifacts discovered throughout the site include tools, weapons, pottery, and decorative items that illuminate daily life in ways that histories focusing on wars and leaders never address, showing how ordinary people lived, worked, and entertained themselves during an era that existed only as legendary prehistory, until physical evidence made it tangible and real. The presence of the Eye of Magnus complicates interpretation of everything else found in Sarthal, raising possibility that the settlement's destruction during the Night of Tears involved struggle over this artifact, rather than simple conflict between Nords and Snow Elves, suggesting perhaps the farmer attacked specifically to prevent humans from accessing or activating something they recognized as dangerous based on their own history with it. The Night of Tears, competing historical narratives. Traditional Nordic accounts portray the Night of Tears as unprovoked attack by snow elves on innocent human settlers, a massacre that forced Isgramor to return from Atmora with 500 companions to avenge the fallen and secure Nordic presence in Skyrim permanently, regardless of farmer opposition. This narrative emphasizes Nordic victimhood and righteous vengeance, providing moral justification for the subsequent war that nearly exterminated the Snow Elves and drove survivors to desperate measures that degraded them into the twisted creatures that now haunt dark places. Alternative interpretations suggest the conflict arose from Snow Elf fears about Nordic expansion and the Eye of Magnus specifically, with the attack representing preemptive strike aimed at preventing humans from accessing artifact. The former understood posed existential threat, if improperly handled. Under this interpretation, the Night of Tears represents tragic miscalculation, where legitimate security concerns led to violence that escalated beyond anyone's ability to control. ultimately destroying both the civilization that initiated conflict and creating suffering that echoes across millennia. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes, with responsibility shared among all parties and events driven by misunderstanding, fear, and the inevitable friction that arises when different peoples compete for the same territory and resources. The Dragon Language in Dovazul. The college maintains some expertise in Dovazul, the language of dragons, though few modern scholars achieve fluency that allows casual conversation or deep reading of texts written in this ancient tongue that predates human languages and possibly predates mortal existence entirely. Understanding Dovazul requires not just memorizing vocabulary and grammar, but grasping conceptual frameworks foreign to mortal thinking, as dragons perceive reality differently than humans, and their language reflects perspectives shaped by immortality and power that make them fundamentally alien, despite superficial similarities in intelligence and consciousness. The Thum, dragon shouts that can reshape reality through vocalization, represents practical application of Dovazul's power, each word carrying weight and force that goes beyond semantic meaning to affect the world directly through sound, making every sentence a potential spell and every conversation a magical working, whether intended as such or not. Ancient Nords learned shouts from Parthenax after Cain sent him to teach humans how to fight dragons using their own language against them. This knowledge transfer representing crucial turning point in the Dragon War when human victory became possible rather than merely theoretical. Modern Nords have largely lost this knowledge, with the Greybeards preserving only fragments of a tradition that once flourished across Skyrim, their monastery atop the throat of the world, serving as living museum for practices that broader Nordic culture abandoned as it moved away from its mythic past toward more mundane concerns. The disappearance of Master Wizard Mirabelle Irvine. Mirabelle Irvine served the college faithfully for years as Master Wizard, her administrative competence and magical expertise making her invaluable to Archmage Savos Aren, as he struggled to maintain the institution's standards while managing external pressures and internal politics that threatened its stability. Her death during Ancano's crisis represented devastating loss not just personally to those who knew her, but institutionally to a college that could ill afford losing someone with her combination of skills, knowledge, and dedication. Mirabelle died trying to protect the college when magical anomalies spawned by the Eye began threatening students and the faculty. Her final act demonstrating the selflessness that had characterized her entire career as she prioritized others' safety over her own survival. Her position remained vacant until Tolfdir eventually assumed the role, though his different personality and approach to administration meant the college had to adapt to new leadership style during a period when stability and continuity would have been preferable to managing additional transitions. The student perspective on college life. Students at the college experience life that differs dramatically from their peers pursuing more conventional education in other institutions, with their days structured around magical theory, practical spell casting, and research projects that would seem impossibly exotic to someone studying commerce, law, or other mundane subjects. Beginning, apprentices often struggle with basic concepts that seem simple to instructors, who have forgotten how difficult magic appeared before years of practice, made it second nature, creating frustration when spells fail, or produce unexpected results that sometimes cause embarrassment or minor disasters requiring faculty intervention. Competition exists among students, though generally friendly rivalry rather than cutthroat antagonism. as everyone recognizes that different specializations make direct comparison impossible, and that success in magical education depends more on dedication and natural talent than undermining peers. Living in close quarters creates social bonds that persist long after graduation, with former classmates maintaining contact across decades, helping each other with research problems, sharing discoveries, and occasionally collaborating on projects that benefit from combining different specializations and perspectives. The college's small size means everyone knows everyone else, at least casually, creating intimacy impossible in larger institutions where students might complete their education without meeting peers studying different subjects in different buildings. The lecture series and academic tradition. The college maintains tradition of formal lectures, where instructors present on topics related to their specializations. These presentations serving dual purposes of advancing knowledge through sharing recent research and modeling academic discourse for students who need to learn how scholars communicate their findings and defend their conclusions against skeptical questioning. Lectures occur in the Hall of the Elements during daytime hours, when students can attend without conflicting with their evening practice sessions or research time, the timing allowing maximum participation while ensuring adequate opportunities exist for the independent work that forms a crucial component of magical education. Topics range from fundamental theory that beginning students need to master through advanced material that challenges even experienced mages, ensuring the lecture series serves educational needs across different experience levels while maintaining intellectual standards that prevent presentations from becoming oversimplified to the point of uselessness. Questions and discussion following formal presentation allow students to clarify confusing points, challenge assumptions they believe deserve examination, and demonstrate their own understanding through thoughtful engagement with material. These exchanges sometimes proving more educational than the prepared lecture, as they explore unexpected directions and reveal gaps in collective understanding that subsequent research might address. The enchanting services and public relations. Sergius Torianus, the college's enchanting instructor, operates a service where members of the public can request items be enchanted, providing one of the few positive interactions between mages and ordinary citizens who otherwise avoid the college due to prejudice or simple lack of interest in academic matters. These enchanting commissions generate modest revenue that helps fund college operations while demonstrating that magic serves practical purposes beyond abstract theory. A message the institution hopes might gradually improve its reputation if enough people experience direct benefits from magical expertise applied to solving their everyday problems. Students occasionally travel to collect items for enchanting, the journeys providing opportunities for them to see more of Skyrim beyond the college's isolated perch, while fulfilling useful function that justifies the time and resources required for these excursions. The enchanting services represent compromise between pure academic focus and pragmatic recognition that institutions need public support to survive, especially when that public harbors active hostility based on historical grievances and cultural prejudices that won't disappear simply because mages wish they would. The ritual spell quests and advanced studies. Master-level spell acquisition requires more than simple purchase from instructors, with the college requiring advanced students to complete ritual quests demonstrating both magical competence and the character necessary to responsibly wield powers that could cause tremendous harm if misused or applied carelessly. These quests send students across Skyrim seeking rare components, testing their abilities in dangerous situations, or simply proving their dedication through completing difficult tasks that reveal whether they possess the determination needed to progress from competent practitioner to genuine master of their chosen discipline. The alteration ritual requires acquiring Kavozane's fang and using it to harvest heart scales from a dragon, a task that tests courage and combat ability, while ensuring the student understands that advancing magical knowledge sometimes requires facing physical danger rather than remaining safely in library or laboratory. Conjuration's ritual involves summoning a Dremora to obtain a sigil stone, demonstrating the student's ability to bind hostile entities and extract information or resources from them without losing control and unleashing disaster on themselves or others. Each ritual reflects its associated school's particular challenges and principles, ensuring students grasp not just techniques, but philosophical foundations that separate responsible practitioners from reckless dabblers who endanger everyone through incompetence or arrogance. The Dwemer connection and Arniel Gain's fate. Arniel Gain, a researcher fascinated by Dwemer technology and the mystery of their disappearance, conducted experiments attempting to recreate the circumstances of that vanishing. His work combining historical research with practical magical application as he tried to understand what Kagranak had done with his tools when activating the heart of Lorcan. Arniel obtained Keening, one of Kagranak's legendary tools, and designed a special soul gem intended to replicate conditions present during the Dwemer's final moments. His preparations meticulous, as he attempted to account for every variable he could identify based on available sources and his own theoretical understanding. When he finally performed his experiment, Arniel disappeared exactly as the Dwemer had, his body vanishing completely while leaving his possessions and clothes behind, proving that he had successfully recreated the effect even as it claimed his existence as consequence of that success. His disappearance demonstrates the dangers of magical research taken to extremes, showing how the pursuit of knowledge can lead to outcomes researchers would never consciously choose if they fully understood the risks they were taking and the prices their experiments might demand. The Winterhold Guard and Civic Protection. Despite the city's diminished state, Winterhold maintains a small guard force charged with protecting the few remaining buildings and residents. Their duties complicated by lack of resources, minimal population to recruit from, and the practical difficulties of securing territory that remains geologically unstable after the collapse. The guards patrol between the Jarl's Longhouse and the bridge to the college, their presence more symbolic than effective given their limited numbers, and the vast wilderness surrounding the hold, where bandits and monsters operate without realistic fear of law enforcement that lacks manpower to pursue them beyond the immediate settlement. Guard equipment tends toward functional rather than impressive, with practical armor and weapons chosen for reliability over appearance, reflecting a force focused on survival rather than ceremony or maintaining prestigious image. Recruitment proves challenging when the hold can offer minimal pay and benefits, while demanding guards risk their lives protecting a settlement that seems cursed, with many positions remaining vacant as potential applicants choose service in more prosperous holds, where compensation better matches danger and opportunities for advancement actually exist. The Jarl's Longhouse, seat of diminished power. The Jarl's Longhouse survived the collapse, becoming the seat of government for a hold that no longer possesses much to govern. Its halls that once hosted important meetings and grand feasts, now echoing with emptiness that makes every sound seem lonely, and every gathering appear pathetic compared to gatherings that occurred when the city thrived. The building contains the Jarl's throne, administrative offices for the few government officials who remain, and quarters for court members who live on site. its relatively intact condition making it the hold's most impressive structure after the college, despite being modest compared to Jarl's residences in other holds. Court proceedings occur here, though actual business remains minimal given the tiny population and limited economic activity, most days passing without significant events requiring official attention or decisions from the Jarl and his advisors. The Longhouse's survival while grander buildings fell has been attributed to sturdy construction, fortunate positioning on particularly stable ground, and simple luck, though some insist divine intervention protected it specifically to ensure the hold retained functional government, rather than descending into complete anarchy after losing most of its leadership during the disaster. The Frozen Hearth. Community gathering place. Beyond providing lodging and meals to travelers, the Frozen Hearth serves as de facto community center, where Winterhold's remaining residents gather to socialize, share news, and temporarily forget the ruins surrounding them by focusing on human connection that makes survival feel worthwhile, rather than merely endurance of existence stripped of joy or purpose. The common room provides warmth, both literal and figurative, its hearth's fire never allowed to completely die, while patrons appreciate the warmth of companionship that develops when the same small group interacts repeatedly, their familiarity breeding comfort that larger, more transient communities cannot replicate despite offering more variety and excitement. Conversations in the Frozen Hearth tend toward nostalgic reminiscence about Winterhold's past glory, mixed with complaints about current difficulties and speculation about whether the city might ever recover, despite all evidence, suggesting such recovery remains impossible given demographic, economic, and political realities that show no signs of improving. The inn's survival depends on college-related traffic, a dependency that breeds resentment even as economic necessity forces proprietors to maintain civil relations with mages whose patronage keeps the business viable when local custom alone would prove insufficient. Regional flora and fauna adapted to extreme cold. Winterhold. Hold's extreme northern location creates environmental conditions that only specially adapted plants and animals can tolerate, with ordinary species that thrive elsewhere in Skyrim unable to survive winters that extend for months, with temperatures that would kill anything lacking appropriate biological defenses. Snow bears roam the wilderness, their thick fur and substantial body fat allowing them to maintain core temperature even during the worst blizzards, while their size and strength make them formidable predators that most travelers wisely avoid confronting unless absolutely necessary for survival or valuable objectives. Ice wolves hunt in packs across the frozen landscape, their coordination and persistence making them dangerous to anyone caught alone or insufficiently armed, their howls carrying across vast distances and sending chills through those who understand that such sounds often precede attacks by creatures that view humans as prey rather than neighbors to be avoided. Hawkers gather on coastal ice, their blubbery bodies perfectly designed for aquatic life in frigid waters where they feed on fish that provide the calories necessary to maintain their bulk. These creatures generally peaceful, unless threatened, but capable of surprising aggression when defending territory or young from perceived threats. The Ice Wraith, threat and magical creatures. Ice Wraiths represent one of Winterhold's most distinctive dangers. Ethereal creatures that emerge from blizzards like living snowflakes, their semi-corporeal forms making them difficult to fight with conventional weapons, while their freezing attacks drain heat from victims rapidly enough to induce hypothermia, even in those wearing appropriate cold weather gear. These creatures appear to be pure elemental ice given semi-sentient form, though debates continue about whether they represent natural magical phenomena or deliberate creations by some ancient mage whose purpose and methods remain lost to history. Encounters with ice wraiths test both combat skills and environmental management, as fighting them in exposed locations during storms compounds the danger they already represent, making survival dependent on quickly eliminating threats before accumulated cold damage reaches fatal levels. The wraith's presence near Winterhold contributes to the region's reputation as hostile and dangerous, discouraging casual visitors and making the hold even more isolated than geography alone would dictate, as merchants and travelers route around areas where these creatures commonly appear, rather than risking encounters that might prove fatal regardless of precautions taken. The political irrelevance in the Civil War. During Skyrim's Civil War, Winterhold's strategic and economic insignificance means both factions largely ignore it, except for propaganda purposes, neither side investing significant resources in securing or contesting control over a hold that contributes virtually nothing to their war efforts, while requiring resources to garrison and defend. Stormcloaks hold it initially under Corea's leadership, his Nordic nationalism aligning perfectly with Ulfric's rebellion, even though he lacks the resources to meaningfully support the war, beyond providing symbolic political backing that carries little practical weight. If Imperial forces capture Winterhold, they install Kraldar, but quickly discover that holding the region provides minimal advantage. Its port destroyed, its population tiny, and its economic contribution negligible compared to costs of maintaining even token military presence in such remote location. The Civil War passes over Winterhold like a distant storm, its effects felt primarily through administrative changes rather than actual fighting. The hold's poverty and isolation protecting it from the worst violence simply because neither side considers it worth the effort required to seriously contest control through sustained military operations. The Shalador's Insights quest line. Urag Gro Shub offers ongoing quest opportunities for ambitious students willing to seek out Shalador's scattered writings across Skyrim's ruins and dungeons. Each recovered text potentially containing magical insights that could advance the college's understanding, while also demonstrating the student's dedication and capability. These writings appear in various locations, sometimes obvious like on altars or shelves, other times hidden in secret chambers that require exploration and puzzle solving to access, their discovery rewarding both persistence and cleverness. The texts themselves contain magical knowledge that translates into tangible benefits, with readers gaining immediate improvements in their chosen specializations, as Shalador's crystallized understanding transfers to those who study his work with appropriate focus and comprehension. This questline demonstrates that valuable knowledge exists outside formal institutional structures, scattered across the landscape waiting for those curious and brave enough to venture into dangerous places seeking wisdom that previous generations created then lost through neglect, destruction, or simple passage of time that erodes human memory and organizational continuity. The Forbidden Names quest and Daedric summoning. Deep in the Midden, investigators can discover evidence of past experiment involving Daedric summoning that went catastrophically wrong, leaving behind artifacts and partial information about binding rituals that trapped a Dremora named Velexine, who possesses knowledge about hidden treasure that might reward those clever and brave enough to complete the ritual properly. This quest requires collecting specific items scattered across the Midden, assembling them correctly, and performing the summoning despite obvious dangers inherent in calling forth powerful Daedric entities whose interests rarely align with mortal well-being, and who possess both motivation and ability to harm those who summon them if given opportunity through sloppy ritual work or momentary inattention. Successfully completing the quest demonstrates mastery of conjuration principles, while also rewarding practical benefits through information about treasure locations or direct magical rewards that justify the risks undertaken, though wise mages question whether disturbing ancient experiments and trafficking with Daedra represents prudent decision, even when immediate benefits appear to outweigh obvious dangers. The Lost Library of Winterhold. Before the collapse, Winterhold maintained extensive public libraries separate from the college's Arcanaeum, these collections serving general population's educational and recreational reading needs, while also preserving historical documents and administrative records that chronicle the city's development across centuries. The collapse destroyed these libraries, taking with them countless unique texts that existed nowhere else, their loss representing cultural catastrophe beyond merely physical destruction, as knowledge contained in those books vanished irretrievably when buildings plunged into the sea of ghosts. Surviving scholars sometimes speak wistfully about particular volumes. They remember consulting in those lost libraries, texts on specialized topics that no longer exist in any form, creating frustration when modern researchers encounter references to these works, but cannot access them to verify claims or expand upon arguments the original authors presented. The library's destruction exemplifies how disaster affects not just present, but future generations, removing resources that would have proven valuable for centuries had they survived. Their absence creating gaps in historical understanding that will never be filled because the primary sources no longer exist for anyone to study or reference. The mystery of Winterhold's architectural foundations. Careful observers of Winterhold's ruins note architectural styles and construction techniques that don't entirely match known Nordic traditions, suggesting the location hosted settlements before the Nords arrived, or that early Nordic builders learned techniques from or collaborated with other cultures whose influence shaped the city's development in ways traditional histories don't acknowledge. Some foundations show stonework too precise and sophisticated for the period when they supposedly were constructed, raising questions about whether earlier civilizations built on this site before Nords claimed it, their structures forming literal foundations for subsequent development that gave later buildings stability they might not have achieved otherwise. The Great Collapse exposed previously buried layers that archaeologists studying the cliff face have documented, their findings suggesting multiple distinct building phases separated by centuries, implying Winterhold repeatedly rose and fell before its most recent catastrophe, each iteration building upon remnants of its predecessors in patterns that might indicate cyclical disaster and recovery rather than unique recent tragedy. These observations inspire speculation about whether the location itself somehow attracts settlement despite inherent geological instability, perhaps due to resources, strategic position, or magical properties that make the site valuable enough that people keep returning, despite history clearly demonstrating the risks involved in building there. Winter holds a relationship with other holds. Relations between Winterhold and other holds range from minimal contact to active disregard, with wealthier and more stable regions treating it as irrelevant backwater, whose problems merit neither attention nor assistance beyond token acknowledgement during formal gatherings where protocol demands representative from every hold receive recognition. Solitude's government officially sympathizes with Winterhold's plight while providing no meaningful aid. Their expressions of support empty gestures that cost nothing while allowing them to appear compassionate without actually committing resources to helping a hold, whose recovery seems impossible and whose poverty makes it unable to repay any investment in its rehabilitation. Other holds similarly maintain polite distance, avoiding direct insults while ensuring their own interests take priority over any collective responsibility toward fellow Skyrim regions. This calculated selfishness reflecting political realities where limited resources must be allocated toward achievable goals, rather than wasted on hopeless causes that would drain budgets without producing returns justifying the expenditure. Winterhold's isolation thus becomes self-reinforcing, its poverty ensuring it receives no help, while lack of help guarantees continued poverty that prevents recovery that might allow it to eventually repay assistance, or at least reduce the burden. It theoretically represents to neighbors who prefer ignoring problems over addressing them. The college's internal politics and faculty tensions. Beneath the college's surface unity lie tensions between faculty members whose different specializations, philosophies, and personalities sometimes create conflicts that administration must carefully manage to prevent disruptions that might interfere with institutional functions or student education. Colette Morance's frustration about Restoration's undervalued status represents only most obvious example of deeper issues regarding which magical schools deserve emphasis, resources, and prestige, with different instructors advocating for their own specializations while downplaying others in ways that create unnecessary divisions. Personality conflicts compound these academic disagreements, with some faculty members simply disliking colleagues for reasons having nothing to do with magic, their interpersonal tensions creating uncomfortable atmosphere that students notice and sometimes exploit when seeking advantage or avoiding accountability. The Archmage must balance these competing interests and egos while maintaining standards and advancing the college's mission, a delicate political exercise that requires skills beyond purely magical expertise, explaining why brilliant mages sometimes make poor administrators while less magically impressive individuals might excel at institutional leadership through superior interpersonal abilities and political instincts. The Winterhold weather patterns and endless snow. Winterhold experiences weather so consistently harsh that the game's mechanics set snow probability at essentially 100%, ensuring the region remains perpetually snow-covered regardless of season or other factors that might create temporary clearing elsewhere in Skyrim. This relentless precipitation reflects both geographical reality of far northern location and also serves narrative purpose. The endless snow, reinforcing themes of isolation, hardship, and decline that characterize post-collapse Winterhold. The constant snow creates practical difficulties for residents, requiring regular clearing of paths and structures to prevent dangerous accumulation that might collapse roofs or block essential passages. This maintenance work consuming time and energy that could otherwise be directed toward productive activities that might improve living conditions or economic prospects. Even clearing snow provides limited benefit, as new accumulation begins immediately, making the work both necessary and futile in equal measure, perfectly symbolizing the broader situation facing Winterhold's residents who must maintain daily existence despite recognizing that their efforts cannot fundamentally change circumstances that appear determined by forces beyond individual or even collective control.